we are going to be talking a little bit about a model that we have started to develop. This is a short paper, and it's still very early in our design phase, but a model that we've looked at to try to maximize success for students in a MOOC. So I'll go ahead and start with that. So just to shout out here to my other participants who are not here, Professor Hoffman and Professor Menchaca, who are here with their aloha spirit, but are there in warmth and are still here, and hoping that you enjoy what we've worked on up to this point. So the entire project that I'm going to talk with you has been motivated around the idea of what is success for a MOOC. And I think if any of you have been in the MOOC space, have been developing or doing MOOCs, then you're probably very familiar with this conversation that's been going on and the original metric of retention, especially early on in MOOCs, and probably still to this date being used very frequently as a success metric. So for us, it was, what else might we define success as? And our decision to move forward with this has really been based on the experiences that we had with the students in the process of delivering a MOOC. And if we could come up with a definition that we were comfortable with for success, how could we share that with you in a way that you might be able to reproduce what we might define as high levels of success for a MOOC? So I'm going to take, I think, what might be a somewhat unusual approach at LAK, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the instructional design of our MOOC and how our students experienced it. The data that we sort of collected that drove us to the model that we ended up presenting in this paper, and some of the student experiences that helped inform that model, describe the model itself, and then make a call to the learning analytics community itself to participate with instructional designers, particularly, which is what my field is probably more aligned with, to help us as instructional designers and learning science researchers to do a better job of meeting success for the students who attempt to take these MOOCs. So the course that we initially did for our MOOC was an e-learning course. Essentially, it was a designed course for students to learn about e-learning. These are mostly educators who are teaching a lot of face-to-face classes, or people who have an interest in creating online education. And the goal was to prepare them to move forward with that concept in their personal spaces, wherever that might be. Some of them, as I said, were educators, and some were just personally interested in teaching. So it's a very traditional module, not doing any gamification, sort of any of the more new, in vogue sort of instructional strategies that are being implemented. We have modules, as you have in most courses. Just like other courses, we have learning objectives and readings and content that the student navigates through. But the course itself is designed from a very applied perspective, and that we want the students to generate something that's meaningful to them and applied. That's something they can run away with, they can share with other people. And in this way, the MOOC is probably more closer to a constructive or connectivist MOOC, where we're trying to engage with the wider public, the society, about how they can contribute back to the world itself, as well as get access to this educational material. But probably the most interesting thing about this MOOC was that we tried to enable registered students and public students, so that would be students who are not registered at the university, to go through this MOOC at the same time. And I think at the time we did it, it might have been newer, but I know a few other MOOCs have done this to this point. I know George Siemens and Dragon had theirs, their data analytics MOOC, where they had the Morpheus red pill, blue pill thing going on. But I think maybe what might have made ours a little different was that we sort of kept our two little student populations here of registered and non-registered together the whole time. And so anytime a public informal learner wanted to come and participate, there was a mechanism, an instructional design that supported that interaction. So we already knew at this point that we didn't want to use retention as the success matrix, metric here. We wanted to look for something different because I think it's widely accepted at this point, or at least it's well said in the literature, that retention itself is a administrative, it's an institutional metric, and that there might be other reasons that a student might want to participate. And those other reasons are what we explore in this model. So the first time we offered this MOOC was a pilot, and we were trying to get a sense of were our instructional strategies even going to work for this MOOC. But there was something in the data that we found in this process that sort of drove us to move towards this model. And that was of the 45 students that we collected data from and could use in this pilot. So I realize this is not massive in this case. About half and half for credit and non-credit. That's not particularly exciting. If we move on, we knew that we wanted again, retention not to be the metric. So we asked them, and I'm paraphrasing from the instrument here, do you intend to finish this course? With really the basic concept of we were just going to filter out the people who did not intend to finish so that we could look at other aspects of our instruction. So that was split. Of the 20-some students who were just informal learners, half wanted to finish or so, half didn't. But I think what we noticed is that the students who intended to finish, about half of them progressed past the intro, which meant that they were more likely to participate through the rest of the course. Some of them made it to the end, some of them just got halfway through. And that's probably not too surprising. I think as an instructional designer, we run into students who want to do something and then end up not doing it for whatever reason that might be. But what's probably more interesting is the second thread. So we had people who said they had no intent of participating in this MOOC. They were just going to go look at the content. And half of them stuck around, so that's kind of odd. We very rarely have a student say, I don't want to do any work, but then do it anyways, and continue to persist in doing it. So that became an interesting question for us, and what was the motivation, what was the environment that we had set up for these people that would make them participate beyond what they had originally said they were going to? We'd like to believe that the content was just that engaging, but maybe that was not it, I don't know. And so we wanted to poke around and see if we could find a reason for that. So we started looking into the literature about what other people had explored when it came to motivations for students, and fortunately for us at this time, a number of papers had been published, qualitative reviews looking at why students were self-reporting their participation in MOOCs. So I have one example from another paper, and then I'm going to give you a couple examples from our students and the things that they were saying. So I find this interesting, and I apologize, I'm going to read this to you because I want to include certain inflections I felt bolding itself did not properly do. So I'm taking a MOOC about American history. My wife and I watch the videos every morning when we eat breakfast and wash dishes. Our breakfast is fun and educational. We enjoy them very much. And so from this person's perspective, and these authors continue to go into it in more depth, it's more of the social experience itself. It's the presence with others. It's the learning environment itself that sort of motivated this particular student to participate. Not necessarily that it was American history, but certainly that might have been why they selected that, because they were naturally interested in that. But it was really the social portion of that moved forward. And so that made us think, what are the instructional strategies that we could implement to target a student of this type? So for instance, if we have more social conversations, more engagement, whether that's just between individuals who are informally practicing this on their own, so talk to a friend of yours outside of the class, or whether it's built synchronously within the course. Either way, that is a strategy that might lend towards this particular type of student. So I'm going to give you a couple other examples of our students that we saw. So a number of our students come from the Polynesian Islands. And on the various islands, there is intermittent internet connectivity. And so they're not really always able to participate in a synchronous way for the MOOCs. And I think if we look at a lot of the more common learning analytics metrics, such as logging in and page views, those particular students might appear to be disengaged with the course when really they're just technically unable to maintain access to the course sometimes, even though they want to participate. So the designs that we use for our course in this case, knowing that this is our community, this is a group of students with a certain access and background that we want to prepare for, is we enable them to download this material. We enable them to access it offline, and we provide opportunities for them to asynchronously participate when they can. Right? And so that's an instructional design choice we make for a very specific type of student who we want to support. Another type of student that we had was one who came from a country where education of young girls was not culturally accepted. And the reason she was participating in this MOOC was because she felt that via these skills that she might gain in the MOOC, she could reach a disenfranchised audience that she wanted to support. At the same time, she did not want to participate in very many synchronous discussions, and she was concerned about sharing information for particular individuals that she felt should not be identified in any way, whether that be that in a public space of other students or not, but was heavily engaged in the idea of what e-learning can provide as an affordance, and not necessarily because it was a MOOC, or even because it was e-learning, but because of the type of students, or type of people she was trying to reach out to. So in this case, having a lot of social conversations might have been a detractor for this type of student. while the ability to download this content as well as be able to relate it to their own personal life, which is the environment that she was living in, might have lended strongly to her interest in staying in the MOOC, participating beyond the initial intro. So we decided to move with the concept of student satisfaction, their happiness with the experience of the MOOC itself as a definition of success. Did we meet the need of the student in what they were trying to learn in the MOOC? And so we might define that as the level in which a MOOC meets a student's needs is the satisfaction that we're trying to measure. So via looking at the past research and looking at our own experiences of what our students have been saying, we essentially proposed 4 constructs, which all lead to sort of a larger concept of overall MOOC satisfaction. And I'm just going to briefly define what each one of these are. So a student who is experiencing a formal learning satisfaction, who looking for more formal learning, is wanting typically a more structured approach, is looking for usually for instructor interaction, milestones to be driven, to be move forward in an experience in an instructional learning environment that they're more used to. Informal learners tended to be looking at, they wanted to manage their own time process, mostly because they're usually unable to meet the requirements of the rigidity of a formal learning structure. And we're trying to participate, but we're not able to do it in the way that was defined for them, and they needed to do it in their own way. Content satisfaction is one that I think almost every MOOC experiences, and that's people who register and join the course because they just want to access the material for whatever intrinsic or extrinsic motivations they have for that, but they want to get in, they want to look at it when they want to, and not be defined by the learning model that's being exposed to them. And finally, social satisfaction, which has a number of interesting types of learning or experiences that people are looking for, which can be not just wanting to learn in a social environment or wanting to learn with somebody else together, but some people who go into MOOCs purely for the sake of meeting other people who are also interested and are not even remotely interested in the learning process that's being given to them. They just want to go and meet other people, and this is a defined method, an easy access point for them to do that. And in that case, many of those people are ones who do not stick around. And if we look at them as a metric of success for them completing, that would be, in our opinion, an accurate way of looking at the MOOC, when they might be very happy with the people they've met and the way that they've been able to progress. So to actually get to our paper, we attempted to do an analysis where we tried to define this construct of informal learning satisfaction and what instructional design metrics might support that construct, and I think we failed somewhat spectacularly at that. So our hope is that we can work with other learning analytics researchers to help us identify more effective metrics, but essentially our model was not strong, and we wouldn't recommend passing it along to other people. But we do believe the overall construct that looking at students and their environmental needs and designing an environment that supports the needs they have to learn is a more effective MOOC instructional strategy and a better metric of success of whether or not the MOOC meets its needs. So again, I'm just hoping, and I think this is reflected somewhat in the keynotes, that instructional designers and learning science researchers, like the kind I work with, are very interested in wanting to engage with the learning analytics community. And we believe that you can help us look at models such as this and other learning models and help us measure what we're doing to see whether or not we as designers, we as instructors, we as an institution are doing our job to meet what the students need, and not necessarily assuming that the student did something wrong or the student didn't do it the way we wanted them to do it, which, albeit there are certainly very interesting studies here about that too. But I know as a learning science and instructional designer that we're hoping for more interaction with learning analytics, particularly in this phase. And it's an open call, a request for people to consider that and either run with our model or a similar model and help us identify that. So that's pretty much it. Mahalo. Thank you again for your time. And I think I hit my time more or less. So.
You got 20 seconds left, so that's great.
Oh, I'll just randomly talk then for 20 seconds.
Do we have any questions?
Okay, it is on, but I still speak softly.
I can hear you, so it's okay.
I'm wondering if you actually looked into some standard evaluation models that are out there, like the Kirkpatrick model or design-based research, as a way to evaluate or assess the courses that you're building, and whether or not you took into account any of those models when you created your own model.
I would say we try to. I mean, design-based research as a methodology is something that we try to implement within our university, and particularly in my group, because we have quite a mix of learning design, instructional design, and developers. So we're constantly in the agile and DBR approach. We did look at other models, and I don't know if we so much decided that they weren't good enough to use. I felt like we didn't see one, particularly in the MOOC space, that looked at especially in an informal learning space for MOOCs, that tried to capture the variety of reasons why people go into MOOCs in a way that would enable instructional design methods to be spread across them. So, for example, I believe there are certain instructional design approaches that fit within more than one of those constructs. So if we go, it's over here. A student, I don't think, is going to be fit into any one of these categories. So it's not just a purely formal learning satisfaction student, nor will they necessarily be that same student in the next MOOC. It just depends on their context and their environment. And it was at least our opinion that the models that we saw were not reflective of that variety and that change of the student and the environment they were in. Maybe we were wrong, but that was our view. So we did look at it, but ultimately we decided, I guess the world could use one more model. Maybe that's not true or not, but that's what we went for. But thank you for your question.
Excellent. Any other questions? Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about your effort to target both registered students and public participants? What did that look like in terms of the design space as you conceptualized it and the kinds of design decisions that you made as you were putting the MOOC together?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to. It was tough. It was really hard to come up with something flexible enough, especially not knowing how many public participants we might have and how we might fit them within the space. What we ultimately decided to do was to lean on our formal learning instructional design practices and come up with an approach we thought was most effective for the formal learning students while providing an opportunity or flexibility to introduce in the non-traditional, the public students. So to give you an example of what that might be is, so some instructors will have defined communication groups when they're talking about a project or something like that. So we developed a tool and created within our practices an ability to, if we got a big influx, hypothetically, of these public participants to come in during the session, whether it was synchronous or asynchronous, that we allowed a method to distribute them within the formal students so that they could participate while not overwhelming them. So the challenge was, a public student could technically come in at any time. So we had to kind of have a cutoff where at some point we had these formed groups and we weren't constantly shifting people around all the time, enabling them to move forward, but we had enough space to scale where possible. So there were a lot of instances of that in this MOOC, and I would say that they did not always go well. I would say there were certainly times where the public participants came in and were probably people who were already experts or just generally knowledgeable about this topic, and they really helped engage in the conversation. And there were those who were just sort of looking at the content and had not participated in the instruction up to that point, and were just quiet. And so they sort of detracted in a way from the dynamic of the group itself. So maybe that maybe by identifying sort of the motivation of these students that are coming in, that might help us better allocate them in the future, and that's something that we would love to explore.
Is there one quick last question? Oh, wait, we're right on time.